I'm very excited for this conversation. Brad Garlinghouse, CEO of Ripple, an absolute powerhouse, I think, both in the digital asset space and now in the Washington, D.C. space as well.
A lot has changed. 1 year ago, I was on this stage, and I was thinking about how much has changed even in that year, and it's profound.
That's what happens when a new administration comes into town, particularly one that had such a stark difference in crypto. I do want to start, though, as a Capitol Hill reporter, back a little bit with market structure. Obviously, you were listening with the last panel and kind of their assessment on things. Kind of sounds like this might be able to get done, perhaps not this year. But I'm kind of curious what you've been hearing, because Ripple, again, has become such a major player, I think, in politics on the Hill. What is your read of the tea leaves?
Well, I think one of the outcomes of having been the tip of the spear in the Biden administration's attack on crypto through the SEC is it's kind of elevated Ripple's position. Even a year ago, sitting on this different building but stage, the SEC at that time was appealing the loss, and we were kind of continuing down this journey of the attack on crypto, and so. We and many others in the industry always got more active in Washington, and it's I think profound to have such a pro-crypto Congress. The Clarity Act passed the House with 78 Dems coming over to support a Republican bill, which I think is indicative of the desire for these technologies to be embraced. Ripple certainly will continue to be active. I don't know how to handicap the Senate. What's going on in the Senate with the Clarity Act, their version of the Clarity Act on the Senate side. I've listened to some of the earlier panels with interest on that. It's always hard to know, particularly during a government shutdown, like how that's going to play out. But look, I remain optimistic. The industry needs what Ripple has already achieved, which is clarity. Mm-hmm. And we had to get clarity through a $150 million lawsuit and a federal judge. But we think the whole industry should have that same clarity. And so we've been fighting for that, and we'll continue to do so.
Mm-hmm. Do you think when you talk with some of your folks on the Hill, does it seem like things are truly at the standstill that they are? Or do you still sense that there is bipartisan momentum to get this done?
I think there's some momentum. I think getting anything done in Washington these days is always a little tricky, but this is a topic which never should have been partisan, in my opinion. It's almost like saying one side's pro-email and another side's anti-email, or one's pro-HTTP and anti. It's like these are technologies. We shouldn't, I think about those in a partisan way. Almost as Brent McIntosh said at the last panel, it's how are these technologies used is way more important, and I think sometimes we lose the plot and people get too caught up in some of the politics of it. But look, I'm still hopeful when you see that kind of bipartisan support in the House. And certainly, again, you're seeing leadership from Senator Alsobrook, Senator Gallego on the Dem side, and you're certainly seeing tons of leadership on the right. I still think there's a chance that happens this year.
Mm-hmm. And kind of staying in the politics realm for just a minute here.
Uh-oh.
Obviously, Ripple is part of a large crypto group that has been playing a really key part in elections. I mean, I think last year it was $200 million spent in races across the country. Currently has a war chest of, I think, $141 million the last time I saw. What is the strategy for the midterms? Fair shake.
Yes. So, Ripple has supported Fair Shake from the very beginning. And again, I would highlight the name. The industry wants a fair shake. This shouldn't be as polarizing, and I do think under the Gensler SEC, the industry was attacked. There wasn't any effort to provide clear rules of the road, and so what we have been asking for are those clear rules. I think Fair Shake, they should speak on their behalf. I'm not on the board or an operator within Fair Shake, but suffice it to say, they're continuing to execute the strategy that played out under the last election, which is we want to support pro-crypto candidates on the left and the right. Ironically, despite this topic being somewhat right-leaning, the last election, Fair Shake supported more Dem candidates than they did our candidates. And I think that's actually a healthy thing, because again, this shouldn't have ever been, in my judgment, bipartisan. I think the Biden administration kind of made it partisan in a way that isn't good for the United States. If we want to be a leader in technologies that are redefining how infrastructure works around the globe, I agreed with Caitlin Long on the last panel. This is very global. the US leaned into that in the late 90s with the internet. We've leaned out in blockchain. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. But I think this administration obviously shifted that. Things like Fairshake are shifting that. And I think Fairshake was incredibly impactful. And we have, a very pro-crypto Congress. And we hope to see the Clarity Act get moved forward.
Absolutely. I guess I just do wonder, because it does seem like on Capitol Hill, obviously a lot of finger pointing, a number of folks are pointing the fingers at Democrats after this draft was leaked, saying this is a step too far. Are they really as pro-crypto as they seem? Does that mean that you're kind of maybe less inclined to support Dems, or does that mean even more support for Democratic candidates, especially those who have shown an interest in promoting crypto?
I'm not just saying this because I'm sitting in Washington on a stage in front of, I'm sure, reporters. I don't think about it as, are we supporting Dems or Republicans? I think about it as, we're supporting pro-crypto, pro-innovation candidates who want to see these technologies as they are around the globe. I mean, the United States is not leading in this. And there is an opportunity for the United States to lead. So I don't think about it as, should it lean more R or more D? I think about it as, keep leaning into pro-crypto candidates and educate both existing sitting congressional leaders and a next generation of congressional leaders. I mean, look, the reality is there is clearly a segmentation of age around all things crypto and blockchain. And there's no doubt in my mind that over an arc of time, the US will get this right. It's unfortunate that under the kind of Gensler regime, I think we slowed things down and it made it very difficult. We pushed things offshore where, ironically, it's less regulated and there's fewer consumer protections, which just makes no sense.
And of course, when it comes to sort of the meat of this law, what we're trying to get into is a large part of it is what is a security, what is a commodity. Of course, as you mentioned, you went through a $150 million lawsuit to get some of that clarity for Ripple. But I'm wondering, as you look at the market, I mean, are there things that should be a security? Like, how do you sort of define what Ripple's product is and why it's not a security versus other products? Is anything a security?
Well, so I think to some degree, the whole lawsuit for Ripple was about what is Ripple, which is a privately funded company that raised venture capital and issued stock associated with that. Those are securities. What is XRP, which is a technology, an open source technology that is kind of native to our products. We use XRP in our product stack, but there are scores of other companies building in and around the XRP ecosystem. People will say things like, well, XRP has a CEO. And I'm like, who is it? Ripple has a CEO. That's me. There's scores, if not 100 other CEOs building around the XRP ecosystem. And I think that's when I hear people say that, I think, okay, they're not educated about what's going on. And so we need to educate people. Obviously, you see that in a number of other tokens where there's a very distributed, very open source community. People don't understand. Ripple does not control XRP. It is open source. There have been amendments passed to the XRP open source technology that we opposed. We were against them and they still passed. That's okay. That's open source technology. There's other things we have championed that have passed, but it takes 80% of the community approving those amendments, which Ripple doesn't have control of that. Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, if you were to define kind of what's a commodity versus a security, how would you do that?
Yeah, I'm going to do everything I can to dodge that question up here. I mean, look, there is language that has been proposed. I happen to think that there's parts of the Clarity Act that passed the House that are quite constructive towards that clarity. I think some of the things that have been circulated, I'm like, okay, I don't actually get how that, well, look, for Ripple, the one thing we will be adamant and absolute about is whatever is, these draft comments that I see, it's like, well, we already won a court case by a federal judge, and if what you're writing gives the SEC an opportunity to bring another lawsuit against us, like, okay, wait, we can't support that. You can't take us back. And I think the industry needs what Ripple has already achieved. Mm-hmm. And what Ripple has done, and we've invested literally billions of dollars in the crypto industry broadly and tried to be a champion of the industry. We fought the SEC as a champion of the industry. And I think that we will continue to support it on a multi-chain basis. Those that I think approach it as there is somehow one token to rule them all, that's not going to be the future of crypto and blockchain. In the same way, there wasn't one browser or one search engine or one auction website. Or I'm thinking back to when I got involved in technology in the late 90s.
I kind of feel like there's one auction website now, though. But that aside.
I don't follow that category.
So mergers and acquisitions. I wanted to ask, because Ripple has a number of examples of companies that they have acquired in the stablecoin realm, in the sort of infrastructure realm. What is sort of the plan here? What's the thought process? What's the end goal?
Partly because of the shift, I think people still underestimate the U.S. as the largest economy in the world went from very strong headwinds to pretty strong tailwinds. Now, we're still figuring out as an industry what do those tailwinds mean in the United States. And again, having the chief legal officer from Citibank, is an example of that shift. And I think he even talked about how it was very, very hard for them to engage this industry. This has been publicly reported, but I personally was debanked by Citibank during the last 4 years. And I think, happily we're past that stage. But I still think people underestimate the shift in those headwinds and tailwinds. And Ripple's thesis has been, okay, now is a time to really be aggressive about growth. And that is both organic growth and continuing to build. We're in the payments business, leveraging core technologies around blockchain and the XRP ledger around payments. We're in the custody business. We're in the stablecoin business. And then earlier this year, to your point around mergers and acquisitions, we spent $1.25 billion to buy Hidden Road, a prime broker, frankly, the largest non-bank prime broker out there. And we bought for $200 million, a stablecoin company called Rail, which was one of the leading stablecoin companies for the enterprise. So corporate treasury looking to use stablecoins to solve some of their internal movement of money, and that has been a great acquisition for us. So we're going to continue to play offense. I hope I have some more news on that very, very soon. And we think now is the time to invest, and that partly because of that macro shift in government policy for the United States.
Interesting. And when it comes to government policy right now, I know we touched on this a little bit the last panel, that there seem to be certain agencies that are kind of giving the green light, full speed ahead, but there are groups like the Fed that are maybe a little bit more tentative. And I'm wondering kind of what your experience has been so far. Do you think that things are going to change when we finally get open a few more openings on the Fed? What are your expectations? Where are we at now? What are your expectations for the next few years?
So I have two thoughts about that. One, and as much as I have enjoyed some of the panels here today, one of the things I would ask everyone to do, both reporters and otherwise, is to hold traditional finance accountable for, yes, I agree, the crypto industry should be held to the same standard around AML, KYC, OFAC compliance. Yes, yes, yes. And we should have the same access to infrastructure like a Fed master account. You can't say one and then combat the other. Like that's disingenuous, and it's hypocritical. And I think we all should call them out for being anti-competitive in that regard. So that's kind of one thought of just there should be a level playing field. Mm-hmm. And to the extent we're seeing people act in different ways. Now, the other part I would say, as much as a lot of the Fed managed by this administration, the federal government, not the Fed, as much as that shift has changed, I think some banks are still nervous until those changes are codified into law. Mm-hmm. The Genius Act obviously helped, and that unlocks, I think, I had meetings yesterday in New York City where banks that would not have talked to us 3 years ago are now leaning in and saying, how can we partner around this?
Around stablecoin.
Around stablecoins, for sure. And again, the delta there is the Genius Act has codified into law. We haven't seen that happen. I mean, again, Ripple has had, we fought the fight and we have clarity that XRP is not a security, but the industry doesn't have that, which I think creates challenges for some of the more conservative banking infrastructure, even though they're like, yeah, okay, we're interested, but are they really leaning in because they're worried that in 3 years from now there's another election, mm-hmm. and is there a shift? I think that's a little bit too cautionary, because I think every day that goes by, even if without the Clarity Act in place, there's more and more firm policy positions that agencies are taking.
Mm-hmm. And so you think that even though there might be some sort of regulatory shift with the next administration, whoever they are, you're not going to go back to where we were at with Gary Gensler?
I definitely don't think that was, frankly, I think that was a dark day for technology in the United States. And they were not acting with good intent. And I could spend a whole half an hour session just on that. And I mean, look, you had a federal judge, this is a quote, a federal judge said about the Gensler SEC, they are not following a faithful allegiance to the law. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty damning for a federal judge who happened to be appointed by Obama, that they would come out and say that about a Biden SEC. I don't think we will go back to that. And frankly, I think the ship has sailed. I think that you can't put the genie back in the bottle in the United States. I don't think you really could, even though Biden may have tried with Gensler. But I think now that we are where we are, we are seeing many banks lean in. But for years, the U.S. was a frozen market. Right. I mean, one quick data point is 80% of Ripple's hiring between 2001 and 2004 was non-U.S. because that's where our customers were. Our customers around the world were leaning in. The customers in the U.S. were, we gotta be careful.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of banks, I mean, Ripple has applied for a national bank charter.
Yes.
Can you just sort of give a brief overview, any updates in that process? How are things going there?
I don't know the exact answer. I mean, look, I think it depends who you talk to. It's been a little disappointing to see some of the traditional banks start to lobby against things like that. It's like, look, if we want more stability, we want clear regulation, having a Fed master account actually is a net plus to that. You want to de-risk stablecoins. Having Circle have a Fed master account, have Ripple have a Fed master account, that's actually a good thing. And held to the same regulatory standards as a bank. Great, we're in. We feel like we're already doing that. Ripple launched our stablecoin under a New York Trust license, which we feel like is the gold standard above what even others have done, because we are all about serving institutional money movement. And institutions aren't going to work with us unless we have really leaned into being compliance first.
Mm-hmm. And I know there have been some concerns raised from community banks who say, look, if you give Ripple and others a bank charter or a master account, we're concerned that you're already going to see funding. Trillions, I think, are projected to go from some of these smaller banks into crypto. There's a concern about a lack of capital. How do you respond to that?
There's nothing that stops community banks from leaning into these new technologies also. This is kind of the classic, people are afraid of innovation and the innovator's dilemma. And we shouldn't penalize customers, consumers, based upon, it may be a particular community bank's unwillingness to lean into new technologies. That doesn't make sense to me. We should want community banks. If anything, it should be, how do we provide clarity such that community banks can be served and leverage these technologies and compete with Citibank? That's a good thing. Right now, the community bank has to pay Citibank. I shouldn't pick on Citi. I like Brent a lot, actually. But let's say HSBC. They're not represented here. But the big correspondent banks are making money from the community banks by actually being their correspondent bank to settle cross-border transactions.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering too, kind of dipping back into market structure here for a second. I mean, if the Senate doesn't get stuffed on market structure, you've said that you've already seen this increased interest in things like stablecoin in the markets. I mean, does that kind of put a freeze on things? If there's no regulatory clarity coming from Congress this year, no certainty, is that going to make it that much harder for a lot of the digital asset space to gain traction with companies, gain traction with banks?
So I think you asked the question in kind of a black versus white, and I think about it as gray. It depends upon the bank. It depends upon what people like Paul Atkins say publicly and put out as position papers on behalf of the SEC or CFTC. And I think it's kind of to be determined. But the more time that goes by, the better I think it is for the industry, period. Again, Ripple happens to be in a unique position, and that we fought a multi-year battle to get that clarity for XRP. And so that the number of people building in and around the XRP ecosystem grew quickly after that resolution was final, because okay, this is now clear. I think the whole industry needs that. The whole industry needs to be able to lean in and build, whether you're building payment solutions, custody solutions, land title registry solutions, tokenizing commercial real estate. Like this tsunami is still coming, and I don't think there's anything that the U.S. federal government is going to do to stop that. Mm-hmm. Leaning in to provide clarity so that consumers are protected, companies know how to operate. The vast, vast, vast majority of entrepreneurs I know in crypto want to play by the rules. They're asking to understand what the rules are.
Sure, but is there, because I hear this on the Hill a lot too, that if they don't provide more of this framework, if they don't provide more, whoever named the clarity bill was really smart, because it just keeps coming up naturally. Whoever provides more clarity, then crypto will go overseas, kind of as you mentioned, that the US will miss the boat, and that, even if we're still having things like, Paul Atkins coming up with stuff, or the SEC regulating on things, or coming out with more clarity, that will not be enough.
Well, the one thing I want to say, your comment is that already has happened, right? Lots of entrepreneurs have decided, I'm not going to incorporate the United States because there's not clear rules. I mean, people can debate about MiCA, which is the Europe's kind of Clarity Act version, and it provides guidance. The FSA in the UK, there are clearer rules coming out of other jurisdictions. And so, yeah, if I was an entrepreneur starting today, I absolutely would look to that. Even the fact that you saw FTX as a non-US entity, bad things happened. Let's lean into having clarity for the United States. Let's not do what Gensler was doing of regulation through enforcement and bringing lawsuits and lawsuits and lawsuits. Why we wouldn't want this industry to have the benefit, meaning the regulatory clarity, the regulatory oversight, and the benefit of having a Fed master account, that's a good thing. I don't know why we would fight that.
Well, I think that might be a great spot to leave it at. I see we're out of time. So Brad Garlinghouse from Ripple, thank you so much for taking the time today. This was great.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you.